This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Well, Mark Carney recently, the Prime Minister of Canada, making a rookie mistake. So says Supriya Dwivedi, who's going to join us in about 20 minutes. Grateful to have you here on this episode of Real Talk. We're going to talk about this Bill C-5. I know a lot of people that are eager to see these interprovincial trade barriers removed, that are eager to see big projects kicked off across the country, maybe with this audience in particular across the western part of the country, are hoping, as one of you said in an email to the show just yesterday, that C-5 can override C-48, C-69. Remember that? The quote-unquote no new pipelines bill. We'll get Supriya's take on C-5. We'll talk about the G7 summit and more. But first, today, we're going to follow up on a story that we were covering over the past couple of weeks. This controversy in Alberta, the government, the provincial government, taking a look at what it says are graphic or age-inappropriate library books. You remember this? At the behest, under the pressure of parental rights groups or parents' unions, they're calling themselves, the province taking a look at this and putting this out to members of the public. We talked to Laura Winton from the Library Association of Alberta. She's going to join us again in about 10 minutes. And the Education Minister here in the province of Alberta, the Honourable Dimitrios Nicolaides, making time for us as well, not just last week, but right now, because we have the survey results in. Almost 80,000 Albertans responded. As a matter of fact, about 200,000 responses were received, but some folks were trying to get their opinions counted more than once. That's right, they had to purge almost 120,000 of those responses because they were duplicates, people trying to cook the books, pun totally intended. But we do have the numbers now about how Albertans really feel about so-called graphic books in their libraries. The government says it's going to move ahead. So says the minister, with a ministerial order this July to implement and develop province-wide standards across all school boards for selecting and managing these so-called graphic and sexually explicit materials in school libraries. Alberta's Education Minister Dimitrios Nicolaides making himself available for follow-up here on the show, which we appreciate. Minister, welcome back this morning. What was probably your number one takeaway from these survey results as you took a look over the past few days?
Yeah, thanks for having me back. To be honest, I wasn't too surprised with the analysis of the survey results. I was surprised, though, that, as you mentioned a moment ago, some individuals were trying to submit duplicate answers, or even in some circumstances, we saw hundreds of responses from the same IP address within minutes. So clearly some nefarious activity there, but huge kudos and thanks to the team that was able to screen through and look at that. But over 42% of parents said that this type of material should never be available in a school setting. I think about only 4% said that this material is appropriate for elementary age children. And about 18-20% thought it was appropriate in a junior high or high school setting individually. And so I wasn't too surprised. It does mirror other professional and evidence-based polling that we've done in the past on this issue. So I think gives us some validation to continue to move forward and set some standards for across the province.
Yeah, I mean, to follow up on the folks trying to submit, or whoever it is trying to submit multiple responses, I think the fact that that's been noted gives credibility to the survey results. Interesting, probably not surprising to see approximately half of the respondents have kids in school these days. Another 10% have kids that are not school-aged, which could be either that they're too young or they've aged out of school. Either way, about 65-70% respondents in the big cities, so to speak, Calgary and Edmonton. Kind of interesting, the survey showing about 44% of parents in favor of the government's plan, of your plan to limit material in school libraries, less than a majority. So why are you proceeding with the ministerial order?
Well, again, I think there is a strong consensus that this material shouldn't really be available in schools. Again, 42% of parents that were surveyed said that it should never be available in school. Only about 4% suggesting that it should be available to elementary age children. So there is a desire for this material to be limited in a more age-appropriate way. And again, this is, we have to remember, this is not a scientific survey. It's just widely available on the Government of Alberta website. So we do use some discretion, of course, in interpreting the results. We did have a polling that was done by a professional polling agency, which I think I've talked about in the past, that looked at this. And, putting all of that together, conversations with school boards, conversations with the Alberta Library Association and other groups, I think it's appropriate for us to set some really high level standards. We don't want to get into the weeds on this issue. We just want to make it clear. You can't have material that has graphic depictions of sexual acts available to elementary age children. I think that's pretty simple and straightforward.
Do you have any evidence that any elementary aged student ever accessed graphic sexual material in a school library?
Well, we don't have any kind of unified provincial system or government system that monitors who's checking out what kind of books. Individual schools, of course, with their and school boards with their respective school IDs and own systems would probably have access to that information, but at a provincial level, we don't.
But obviously, that's something you would be interested in knowing, and you have every resource at your behest. Like, do you have any evidence that any elementary age student ever accessed this graphic material from a school library?
Well, I think we have asked our major school divisions to give us some more information as to how this situation kind of developed and unraveled. So hopefully we'll get some more clarity in the weeks to come as well, a little bit, and understand a little bit more about the process. Again, my question is, what purpose do they serve on the shelves? And in terms of evidence, I did recall looking at some of the online catalogs that some of our school divisions have and seeing several of these books being checked out. So again, we don't have that kind of information to know by exactly whom and which student. That's not appropriate for the government to have that kind of data and information. But I'm not convinced as to the purpose that they would serve on being on a school library bookshelf.
Okay, we're going to put the link to the survey results. They're obviously available to the public in the show notes so people can check them out. The survey asked, basically who should be responsible for deciding, who should decide what materials are age appropriate in school libraries. The respondents, like we said, nearly 80,000 of them, said librarians, about a quarter of them, 23%, parents, 19%, let's say 1 in 5. School admin, 13%, school boards, 13%, teachers, 20%. The government's not even listed on the survey, but ultimately, at the end of the day, this ministerial order means that the government's going to be making the call. Why wasn't the government on the survey, and what do you make of the results there?
Yeah, well, I think, the results show very clearly that there's some varied opinion, of course. And I also, in looking at that, I did see there's a strong desire and indication for parents to be involved and have a stronger say in some manner. But the question, of course, deals with the specific selection of book material that is available at a school library. And I don't even think that the government should be involved in that process. I think we have to set some very high-level guidelines and standards and say this kind of material is not permitted for elementary age children. And as it relates to specific books and specific titles, that's not something that the government should be deciding. That's something that indeed school librarians, teachers, and other staff should be deciding. That's for them to determine based on the demographics of their student population, based on the needs and interests of their students. But we have a responsibility to establish some parameters. I don't think it's appropriate for elementary age children to be exposed to books that contain graphic depictions of sexual acts, oral sex, self-harm, molestation. I don't think that serves a strong academic purpose.
And I mean, the survey results, I'm just scrolling back here, like basically everybody agrees with you. I mean, I just think it's obvious, right? Like if you look at the results, at what age should children be able to access materials with sexually explicit content in schools? Parents say 4%. Nobody said more than 5%. Interested Alberta. Virtually nobody thinks that elementary school kids should have access to this. Where it gets interesting is the high school numbers, right? And we'll dig into those more in just a little bit. I have 1 more minute left with you, Minister. So I just got to ask, when it comes to the actual process and how this will roll out and books that are being removed, we heard en masse from people that either notice trends or are concerned about a trend that these are books in particular following LGBTQ2S plus themes. And I'm curious to know how the Education Ministry, how the government, or who will oversee the removal of these books to ensure that that's not disproportionately targeting that population or that issue in general.
Well, I have full confidence in our school libraries, librarians, teachers, administrators, and school boards and others that they'll be in full compliance with the standards and direction that's established by the government. And so I don't intend to go peering over anybody's shoulder and make sure that specific books are off a shelf or anything of that nature. I'm not a big fan of significant government intervention or overreach. I think we have a responsibility to establish some very high level standards, which again are very simple, and leave it to the proper individuals to make sure that that's carried out. And in talking with our school boards, that was made very clear to me that they prefer, government can establish the what, and we'll establish the how, and we'll look at the specific parameters. And I'm totally happy with that approach.
All right, Alberta's Education Minister, the Honorable Dimitrios Nicolaides. Thanks for making yourself available. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. All the best.
Yeah, Real Talkers, let us know what you think. To talk at RyanJesperson.com. We're going to get to the librarian perspective on this in just a little bit. We wanted to follow up with Laura Winton. We asked her to join us again. Last time she talked to us, she was the president of the Library Association of Alberta. She let us know her term was wrapping up. Now she's serving as past president of the Library Association of Alberta. Laura Winton coming up in just a quick second. I want to let you know that these conversations happen on Real Talk with the support of our partners like Edmonton Opera, and we're thrilled to let you know that they're now, of course, ready to go on 2025-26 season subscriptions. That's right. Some legacies passed down, others must be claimed, and this is a season of legacy with Edmonton Opera. You can find out all the details at edmontonopera.com. The season subscription's now on sale. You can go with your main stage subscription that allows you to see all 4 productions. It'll save you 20% off ticket prices. Or you can compose your own season, a 2 or 3 show package. You'll still save 10%, and you can save on productions including Bravi, that's Opera's greatest hits, coming up in October of 2025. Opera's greatest moments come to life with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra and Edmonton Opera in a breathtaking theatrical event. You can learn more and get your tickets today at edmontonopera.com. We love what our friends at the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce are doing. You can check them out on Instagram. If you don't follow them there, I encourage you to do so. I feel like I learn something every week from our friends at the Edmonton Chamber. You can learn about what they're doing. In particular, we had a great conversation about downtown business and the like in our most recent episodes. Well, this CRL vote, which I asked Don Iveson about earlier this week, this is the vote on extending the downtown community revitalization levy later this month. Well, that's going down this public hearing today at City Hall. This would secure like $500 million in tax-neutral investment for downtown Edmonton. It'll fund the projects in that downtown action plan. You can learn more about what the Chamber's doing on this by checking out their website. Go to edmontonchamber.com/advocacy/CRL. You can learn more about the benefits of membership in the Edmonton Chamber, including networking opportunities. Feels like they're doing 3 or 4 things a week over there. Again, their website, edmontonchamber.com. And before we dive headfirst into the Real Talk live chat, which is powered by Park Power, I want to remind you about the savings that are available to you right this minute, exclusively based on the fact that you're a friend of the show. That's right. If you go to parkpower.ca/realtalk, you can see some promo codes that'll save you up to $150 off your first bill with Park Power. Internet, electricity, and natural gas is what they do. We're proud to partner with them for a number of different reasons, including the fact that they're a grassroots Alberta family-owned business. And also, they give a lot of their profit back to the nonprofits in this province. They walk the walk, so to speak. That's our friends at Park Power. You can check them out online, learn more about their plans. Of course, you're going to find those promo codes there when you bring your business over. Internet, electricity, and natural gas. They make it nice and easy for you. I did the same thing. Didn't have to call my old provider. Didn't have to have an awkward breakup. The team at Park Power handles it all. Can you hear the enthusiasm in my voice? This is the tone of voice from somebody that's saving hundreds and hundreds of dollars a year on their internet, electricity, and natural gas. And I'd love for you to do the same with our friends at Park Power. That's your friendly local utilities provider. I want to jump into the live chat here as we welcome Laura Winton back to the show, past president of the Library Association of Alberta. Noob, try again. Thanks for the super chat, Noob. Says, I still want to know how many books they keep referring to that they actually found in school libraries. Says, we need to get context, not vague claims. Kathy says, this is why teachers and librarians are in charge of checking out materials for the kids. They should know what's there. They know what's age appropriate. Ms. KD says, why aren't librarians and educational professionals making decisions on what's age appropriate? That's the majority opinion. If you look at the actual survey results, I see we got a bunch of teachers in the chat, so we're going to get to your comments as much as possible. Tracy says, what purpose do books serve on the shelves? A great question to hear from the Education Minister. Lorraine says, this is simply not appropriate for the government to be doing this, to be getting involved in this. David says this is clownery at its finest, says that this government's been a disaster on the public service front, says there's a lot of people moving here only to find that we're underfunding education, healthcare, etc. I mean, there's a lot to talk to. We could hang out with the Education Minister for at least an hour. But Laura, you were in our green room listening to the interview. Before we open this up to your thoughts on the survey results, what do you make of what the minister had to say?
I mean, he has a consistent message, and that's what they're sticking with. I think it's interesting to hear him continue to say that there's consensus on this issue. I think what the survey results show me is that there really isn't consensus. We have 49% of parents saying they're not at all supportive of the government moving forward with this. So that doesn't sound to me like we have consensus on the issue.
Yeah, I mean, 80,000 people. By the way, like, isn't it interesting to get insight into how they let you know in the survey results, again, publicly available, we'll punch them in the chat, 196,901 entries. They had to get rid of 118,574 of them. I'm happy to say, or happy to see, like I said to the minister, that they catch that type of tomfoolery, but it gives you a sense of what's really happening behind the scenes when governments are soliciting public opinion on these types of things.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and we know that. So we know that groups like, Action for Canada and Parents for Choice in Education are pushing these surveys and rallying supporters to get in there and get that voice heard and to outweigh other voices potentially.
Yeah, I want to let people know as well that there are some parents groups that have been getting involved in this and that have been reaching out to us. And I want to let this audience know that we have on multiple occasions offered interview time and airtime to these parents groups who have, to this point anyway, declined the opportunity for those interviews. So that we're not hitting just up one perspective here. I'm not sure why those folks are adding us to their mailing list and then not responding to interview requests, but I digress. Is it fair to say that maybe Albertans are split on this? Like, there was not an overwhelming opinion on anything. There wasn't 85-90% on literally any element of this polling.
Yeah, absolutely. There does seem to be a split here. I think what's interesting about the groups like Action for Canada and Parents for Choice in Education is that they're holding themselves up as the example of parents. They are parents and they are sort of versus librarians or versus educators. And, I just don't think that's the reality. I'm a parent as well. I'm deeply concerned about the material that's available on my children's school shelves, concerned as a librarian and as a parent. And so, painting librarians or painting teachers as not having concerns. This is our job. This is what we do. We care deeply. We study this. We spend lots of time thinking very carefully about it.
Like I said to Minister, I mean, everybody, it seems almost everybody, like 95% of people are on the same page about elementary school kids being able to access, so-called graphic or sexually explicit materials. Literally nobody thinks, like even librarians, 4% think, school administrators, 4% think elementary kids should have access. 3% of teachers. I'd like to talk to those 3% of teachers, by the way. I digress. Middle school is where it gets kind of interesting. Maybe 1 in 5, like 20%, 25%, based on whether or not they're librarians, administrators, teachers, or parents. But what's particularly interesting is the highest number on this, whether it's parents, teachers, admin, librarians, or so-called interested Albertans, the highest number is that kids should never be able to access graphic or sexually explicit materials in schools. That is the highest opinion. It's not a majority opinion. 42% of parents is the highest number you see. Even that, not a majority opinion. But what does that say to you?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it says that, we're using some interesting language here, right? Like, we're talking about graphic sexual content. And one of the concerns with a ministerial order like this is that that's going to mean different things to different people.
Totally.
So, I think a lot of people read that and go, well, of course, children should never have access to pornography. But there is no pornography in school libraries. Like, what we're talking about in the examples that were given are award-winning graphic novels that absolutely deal with themes of sexuality, that have some depictions of sexual content in them. They are appropriate for teens, and that's where you're going to find them in school libraries. And a large number of parents there said, high school students should have access to that material. That's the appropriate age group for that stuff.
Tracy says, well, when were parents not allowed to be involved? She says, for the love of God, schools are always welcoming parents to be more involved. Jillian, who's a regular in our chat, we happen to know she's a junior high school teacher, says, no, parents do not get to be involved in what books go into the library. What a gong show that would be. Where do you land on this?
Well, I mean, I as a librarian, what I would say is that there is absolutely a role for parents to be involved in collections. That's why we have policies where parents can request material be added to the library, where they can request material be reconsidered and removed from the library. Librarians and educators are happy to have those conversations with parents and to consider those perspectives. That's the appropriate role for parents to have. I also think, I'm a parent myself. I think that responsible parenting absolutely involves being aware of what your child is reading and what they're bringing home. I would encourage parents to do that and have conversations with their kids about that material. But, do I think parents should be in the driver's seat selecting what material ends up on the shelves in the first place? Probably not. I'm not sure how we would make that work administratively. I would also point out that that's not what the government is proposing here. The government isn't proposing more parental involvement. The government is proposing more government involvement.
Yeah. It was kind of interesting to see Minister. I mean, we had limited time with him, but he says I don't even support government making these types of decisions. I go, well, the government kind of is making these types of decisions. The survey asks, how do you think libraries should handle material with explicit content? 41% of respondents supportive of restricting access based on age and grade level. That's what I would vote for. 30%, just under 1 in 3, say that these books should be removed entirely. 17% think that they should be kept available to all students, and 12% believe that parental permission should be required. I can think of many reasons why people might push back on that, but where do you land on this and why?
Yeah, I mean, well, what I would say is that material is already restricted by age in libraries. We have different sections. Books are not just all in a big pile in the middle of the room, right? We have picture book collections and easy reader collections and juvenile collections and teen collections. So it's already divided by ages. Teachers who are taking kids into those classrooms know where to take their kids. They're trained educators. They know what material is appropriate for their age of children, and that's what they're directing them to. And librarians, again, are there to assist with those decisions. So I think what most people are asking for here is already in place. So one of my big concerns here is just I'm just not sure what problem we're solving.
Okay. Now I want to acknowledge that some librarians are parents, right? Okay, because I'm about to point out
absolutely
that parents of school-age children and librarians, there's one issue in particular that they do not see eye to eye on, but I want to acknowledge that there's many librarians that are probably parents. So there's some overlap there. But parents of school-age kids were most supportive of requiring parental consent. Again, not a majority position, but 43%. And school or public librarians were least supportive of it at 12%. Basically, 1 in 10 librarians think it's a good idea for parental consent to be in the mix. About 4 out of 10 parents think it's a good idea. Where do you land on parental consent? Can we dig into this a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely can. I mean, what I would say is there's lots of layers to that. I think a lot of librarians understand that administratively that's going to be a huge issue. I think in general also one of the key tenets of librarianship is intellectual freedom. And we believe that applies to children as well as adults. We have the UN Charter of Rights of the Child. We have that adopted in Canada. It includes the right to intellectual freedom for kids. So, we feel like children need to have some freedom to make those choices. But of course, kids are bringing home those books. And I think it's really important for parents to take a look at what their kids are reading, to have those conversations with them. Again, I am a parent as well. And I'm always checking out what they're bringing home from the school libraries. And if there's something in there that seems a little off to me, I'm going to ask the question like, hey, what interested you about this? What was this all about? And you'll find you get some really interesting comments from your 8 and 6-year-olds.
Yeah, I bet. So your takeaway from this, we got the ministerial order coming in July. There will be kind of a universal set of standards. The minister says he's confident that school boards, librarians will comply with the order, etc. Where does the Library Association go from here in your context as past president? What's the scuttlebutt?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things I want to see is some sort of tracking in place of what actually is removed from school libraries based on this. I think one of the concerns that we have is, again, the minister has said sexually explicit content. I've also heard heard him say material that relates to self-harm. He's talked a lot about elementary being, obviously no one thinks it should be in elementary schools. So I want to know, what is this ministerial order going to actually be? Is it that sexually explicit content can't be in any school library? Is it going to be limited to elementary schools? And then depending on that information, I don't think everybody has the exact same definition of what sexually explicit content means. So what's actually going to get removed from the shelves? What are those numbers going to look like? Are there going to be themes in content? Like, are we going to see more LGBTQIA2+
more
material
removed?
Removed.
Yes.
Are we going to see a trend where that's going to be the type of the material that comes off the shelf? So I'm hopeful that the government will do some kind of tracking to see the impact of this broad ministerial order.
Yeah, Kathy says when you got a K-9 school, there's obviously going to be some overlap of the types of books that are available. Erica says all of this stems from a couple of isolated incidents in the States that were admittedly, she says, pretty horrific material given to kids, but that was extremely isolated, says Erica, not some widespread issue, and it's not happening here. Wise Kyle says this is a great ministerial order. We needed this a decade ago as the government had to put a stop to this madness that started when I was in school. Jim says if you set a ministerial order, you are directing. Cam in a pizzeria says, why don't you just put out these inappropriate books in like a separate room in the back corner of the libraries for security? Maybe hang like a beaded doorway curtain, like the video stores back in the day. I don't mean to treat this lightly or be glib about it. I know Cam doesn't either. He's a parent himself, I happen to know. I would just say, and here's my speculation, and I might be wrong on speculating about this. Maybe the government does go old school book burning style, and I really don't think that's going to happen. My guess here is that the government is responding to an engaged and organized group of parents. It's a very important part of their voter base. I think that the Venn diagram, the overlap of the parents involved in this, again, we've invited the Alberta Parents Union to be on the show. They've not responded to multiple requests. I want to let you know that the door is still open for them. But I think the government had to do something to address this, to keep it from being problematic for them politically. My guess is that the ministerial order, when it comes down to the brass tacks, is probably, I'm thinking, going to be pretty reasonable, because the last thing you need to do is light a big fire under the rest of the province. The polling shows that this is not one of those things. Like, when we talked about parental notification on pronouns or the idea of trans women competing in sports, that kind of idea, polling actually supports the government's position on this, which is why politically they took no risk on that. I mean, that's a fact. Here, this is politically risky, and they risk handing some momentum over to the NDP when, quite honestly, the NDP doesn't have a lot of momentum right now. So my guess is that the ministerial order is probably going to fall short of some of the things that people are afraid of, and I hope I'm not proven wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I hope it will be very limited. That's what we would like to see. But again, we continue to have concerns because, when you start introducing ministerial orders, things that are censoring material in libraries, you are going to be in a situation where fundamentally librarians are worried and worried that parents are going to come after them and worried that the minister is going to get involved. And so librarians and educators start using prior restraint. They start excluding more things because, we don't want to get in trouble, right? And that's the danger of something like this. So, I mean, am I hopeful that won't happen? Absolutely. But I think the Library Association of Alberta's position is that our kids deserve the absolute best in their schools. And that means broad, diverse collections that reflect their experiences and that are curated by trained professionals who are listening to parents and having those engaged conversations.
Yeah, 100%. Ken K says, doesn't this government want to start pushing kids into the trades in junior high? If kids are old enough to start their working life, they're certainly old enough to choose their own books. I don't know about junior high, but Ken, yeah, there have been some initiatives. I actually think some of them are great to get kids plugged into the trades in high school. If that's where their career path is taking them, why not get them started? Others are suggesting more political involvement, engagement in the chat, which is good. If you're choked about this, email your MLA, be in touch, leave a comment on our show, send us an email. Justin says the minister cherry-picked what worked with his narrative. Sure, all politicians do. Talk show hosts do as well. You can take a read through the entire survey results yourself. We've posted them in the chat. They'll be in the show notes as well. Justin goes on to say this is nothing more than a dog whistle. He says, dubious, says, as a person with no kids, I'm deeply concerned with how many parents in society don't parent their children. Says we're like 4 or 6 links down the chain of the blind leading the blind at this point. A lot of others are pointing out that even young kids, elementary school age, kindergarten age, can't even read some of the material that we're talking about. There's a lot of good points that are being made. At the end of the day, I don't know that this is the biggest issue that's facing people in the province, but it's certainly flared up. And anytime you're talking about government involvement and what's available in libraries or parental pressure on government, it's going to get people's attention. Thanks for your advocacy. Thanks for hanging out. Anything you wanted to throw out to the audience before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just reiterate that, librarians really want to work with parents on this. We want to hear from them. We want them to use those processes that are in place. Our concern is making sure that kids have the best possible libraries available to them, and that doesn't come from limiting what can be on the shelf through broad government intervention.
Hey, thanks for your involvement on the show over the past couple of weeks. Let this audience know you reached out to us as a real talker and said, your email signature said it all. I mean, she's the president of the Library Association of Alberta. We'll get you on, but we appreciate your availability on 2 fronts and follow up as well. And thanks for doing it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you got it. Supriya Dwivedi joining us in just a minute from Ontario. She's a mom. I'll get her take on this. This isn't flaring up under Doug Ford's government, but Supriya's always got something to offer. Plus, we'll talk about what she says is Mark Carney's rookie mistake at the G7. We'll talk about that Bill C5 as well. Before we do, Johnny, let's get into some story time. If you could give me a nice music bed, I want to celebrate the 19th of June at the Ranch Golf and Country Club, an incredible edition of the Real Talk Golf Classic in support of the Real Talk Julie Rohr Scholarship. And thanks to our friend Carly Watson, we have some amazing photos as we kind of recap what wound up being an absolutely wonderful day. The skies were unloading. The weather was brutal that morning. But about 30 minutes before we were set to tee off, the sky just opened up. The fairways started drying out. The sun started shining. The temperature rising. And it was Julie Rohr's birthday. How thrilled were we about that? The Brass Tactics played us in incredible music. There's our tournament organizers right there, Emily, Christine, and Emily. Are these Noob's videos? Noob did such a good job. Our pal Noob, try again. You see him in the chat, was out there volunteering with us. This is the Real Talk hole. Hole 4 that you're seeing. Noob had his drone up in the air. And our thanks to our friends at National Bank Financial, the title and presenting sponsors of this year's Real Talk Golf Classic. We're so grateful to them making these scholarships available. Everybody loves a photo booth. And there's our buddy Darren Bond with the Johnny Infamous photo booth in full effect. Amazing sponsors. We had activations on every single hole, including our friends at Parlor Barba, that were keeping everybody looking tight, keep it neat, like they say. There's our friends at the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce that were out there in support, sponsoring one of our $100,000 holes in one. That's right, we had 4 of them, 4 shots at $100,000 or a vehicle worth $100,000. There I am doing my best with my 3-wood. That hole 4 at the ranch, a beautiful one. If you can sail the bunker, it sets you up nice for a wedge into the green. Our friends at the River Cree enjoying Peter Keith and Muley's charcuterie cart. How fun was that? And look at this. Our pal Kelsey celebrating her 40th birthday out there on the links. 152 golfers out there enjoying this perfect afternoon in support of a great cause. That's Fuge Sausages. This is the Real Talk cigar attraction. Everybody loves a cigar, don't they? We had a good time with that one. Everybody blowing off a little bit of steam. Noob's drone shots are going next level. The ranch just did an amazing job on the hospitality front. Of course, we wind things up with a wonderful steak dinner. Had a lot of fun out there. Our friends at Abaco Drilling, in partnership with Analog Brewing, made sure that we had cold beers on the table for everybody as they came in off the course. That's Hani Bombay Walla. She was the first ever recipient of the Real Talk Julie Rohr Scholarship. And thanks to golfers and sponsors, we've been able to keep that support going for Hani and the other recipients. That's Katie Cook-Chivers, general manager of our company, Relay. She's the director of the scholarship, made the trip up from Calgary to be there. And this is Oliver Moore. This is one of 2 recipients for 2025, new recipients, I should say, as we're able to offer up to 4 years of support for each of these young people. Oliver told an incredible story. It's a story rooted in tragedy, losing his parent, losing his mom, his dad struggling after the fact. Oliver talked about some of the issues that his family's been encountering and shared how this scholarship has helped him through his year of studies at the University of Alberta. Real Talkers, I am so happy to let you know that the Real Talk Golf Classic ended up raising a whopping $61,500 for the Real Talk Julie Rohr Scholarship. That's a scholarship for post-secondary students in Canada who've lost a parent to cancer. Really unbelievable stuff, and we're so grateful for every single one of you that showed up to make it happen. Our thanks to the team at The Ranch. That's theranchgolf.com. I'm talking to Murray McCourt. If you can believe this, he's the GM. Oh, he's much more than GM. He's basically owner, manager, golf executive pro out there at The Ranch. The big cheese is the point I'm making. I go, Murray, how many tournaments you guys going to do out here this year? 190. 190 tournaments they're going to do this year. Nobody does it better. They have a completely seamless operation. If you're in charge of running the tournament or organizing the tournament for your community association, your company, your nonprofit, make sure that you get in touch with the team at The Ranch. You can find them online at theranchgolf.com. I'm so proud to call that my home course, and we will be back there next year for the 5th annual Real Talk Golf Classic. We're excited to see you all there. Again, our thanks to everybody who participated. Well, our good friend Supriya Dwivedi, when I was talking about this library book thing, she goes, well, I don't know. She goes, nobody's really talking about that, to be honest. In Ontario, nobody's really following that. But I go, Supriya, everybody's going to expect you to have a hot take on this. You're a mom. You pay attention to developments in politics. My friend, as we welcome you back to the show, could you see the Ontario government getting involved in something like this? Do you see parental pressure targeting provincial government in Ontario on stuff like censorship or scrutiny of school library books? Has it been a thing at all?
And 100,000%. I could totally see this happening, not just in Ontario, but in multiple provinces across the country. And I mean, when would this have been? 2018, I think. In the lead up to the 2018 election, let's just say, my timeline might be a touch off. There is a huge groundswell of folks that were vehemently opposed to the sex ed curriculum that was being taught in schools here in Ontario. So, there's always some iteration of this argument happening where you have a bunch of ostensibly concerned parents about the breadth and reach that the school has, whether it's through books or whether it's through curriculum, will have on their children, and it creates a sort of, natural tension.
Yeah, I was saying to Laura Winton, who just joined us from Library Association of Alberta, I said what I suspect here is that the UCP touches on this to be able to answer back to a portion of their base that expects them to do something about this. But when it comes to actually sinking their teeth into this, coming across, I think, at risk of looking pretty heavy-handed and swerving out of their lane. This is a government that talks a lot about the feds staying in their lane. I don't imagine that putting this into practice is something that they'd really dig too deeply into. Do you agree with me that it's a politically risky move?
I agree it's politically risky, 100%. And I agree with your assessment that, they could end up, essentially biting off more than they can chew, so to say. But it doesn't seem like this particular government has a problem with doing that. Haven't they bitten off more than they can chew in a whole host of other areas? I don't know, the whole whether you should pull out a CPP or not, and make it a whole issue, and then not wanting to release the results of their own internal data that showed not super popular, right? That's just one example that comes to mind, but it seems like they don't mind it because, for a lot of political parties, this is by no means unique to the UCP, but they hear often from the loudest people, and the loudest people aren't always the most representative people of the folks who vote for you. And so increasingly, I think you have a lot of political parties that are driven by a vocal minority. And I think the other thing that's risky here for the UCP is just that when you're looking at a whole scale something, when it involves a culture war type debate, it's very easy for folks to just go, okay, so they're just copying what they're doing in the States.
Right.
And, conservatives should rightly be annoyed, and I'm using small c conservative, when progressives or those on the left kind of throw that at them. but then stop making the case so easy for us to do that, right? Would be my suggestion.
Yeah, you're referencing the results of that survey, asking Albertans whether or not they wanted an Alberta pension plan, whether or not they wanted to pull out of the CPP. I'll remind the audience that's an irreversible move. Once you're out, you're out. And so it's a big deal. It's not something that one government can do and then another government can re-enter CPP. Took nearly 2 years for the province of Alberta to release the results. They were out about a week ago. And the polling showed, the survey results rather, showed that 63% of respondents were opposed to an Alberta pension plan. Only 10% were in support. And I think a lot of people, at least in my circle, people are sort of using this. They're extrapolating that data and they're applying it to an Alberta separation initiative as well. It's not apples and apples. I won't suggest the same thing. However, pretty interesting to see that only 10% of respondents, and these are the most motivated people. I think the most motivated element of the population is who's going and answering these surveys, taking the time to do them. 1 in 10 want to see an Alberta pension plan. If you're a politician, you're not paying attention to 10%.
No, you're just not. And, if you're a 10% that cares about something really, passionately, then I'm sorry to you. But unless you can create a mirage, if there's more of you, then, and no government's going to care, because why would they cater to a minority of a minority, trying to advocate for something that doesn't really make a lot of sense from a policy perspective.
Yeah, no kidding. Hey, I want to talk to you about what you described as Mark Carney's rookie mistake as Prime Minister. But first, I want to ask you about Bill C-5. This is this so-called nation project building bill. This is the one that Carney, I guess, obviously believes is the one that's going to get some big projects moving across the country. I've heard some voices here in the West suggesting that this could be a bill that may override C-48 or C-69, could allow things to happen. But the Senate, somewhat unpredictable on this. I've seen critics suggesting that this bill largely glosses over concerns, perspectives, realities, input from Indigenous and First Nations communities across the country. How's C-5 landing with you? If it works, if it gets projects kickstarted, Carney will get some credit for sure, including, I would imagine, in Western Canada, but it's hardly uncontroversial.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And look, I think, it's really interesting because his legislative start has been very much focused on this Bill C-5, the, nation building one economy bill, whatever you want to call it. But it's Bill C-2 is another bill, and we can get to that in just a second. But that's kind of what I've been hearing the most in my own dork circles, if you will, from folks that have their backs up against a wall when it comes to the privacy implications. But Bill C-5, which is this, ostensibly it removes all of the trade barriers that are within the federal government's control when it comes to interprovincial trade, legislation and barriers and knocking those down. But I think the most worrying aspect for a lot of folks are twofold. One is this notion that this will strip down the duty, which is a fundamental duty to consult First Nations under the Constitution. And then the second is that it puts too much power in the hands of cabinet and government to basically pick and choose which projects we decide to move forward with. Now, I certainly understand, obviously, both of those concerns. The one thing I would say in defense of the Carney government here is that they did campaign on this. They explicitly campaigned on the removal of trade barriers, right? And they did campaign, perhaps not to the exact detailed degree of what's in the legislation, but I don't know how many times I heard, the Prime Minister Carney and now a good chunk of his front bench say some variation of it's time to build and that we need to build these projects. So I personally, I do think that there are some worrying aspects of the legislation, particularly when it comes to the, all of the power that a minister can hold in terms of yaying or naying certain projects. And I think if the shoe was on the other foot, a lot of progressives would be rightfully quite concerned what this legislation could mean in the hands of a conservative government. But campaigns do matter, and mandates are given at the end of who wins an election. And I think, on a balance of probabilities here, it's sort of the ledger, if you're making a score sheet or whatever, it goes to Carney, because it's not like they tried to hoodwink people, right, on this. It's not like they never talked about building, they never talked about projects, and all of a sudden this is one of the first bills they come forward with and are trying to move it forward. So I'm not saying there won't be problems. I take your point about the Senate, and there's some uncertainty there. I think there's also going to be a few legal challenges. Whether or not they're successful, we'll see. The other wrench that I'll throw in, which is interesting, because you did mention, overriding of certain other parts of legislation. Quebec has its own charter, which is a quasi-constitutional document. Which is to say, it takes precedent over other parts of legislation that may come about.
Yeah.
It guarantees the right to live in a healthy environment, and one that respects biodiversity. So if we are, let's say, ramming through a project that interferes with that right, you're going to have, 43 unhappy Quebec MPs, I think my number's right, that are going to go to the Carney government on this. So I don't know. Like, this is by no means a done deal, even though the Conservatives and the Liberals did work together to get this through the finish line into the Senate before they rose.
Yeah, and I love when you and I talk, because we always kind of have like the Alberta-Ontario thing going on, and I can tell you for a fact that even when people are talking here, whether it's like on the golf course at the Golf Classic or whether it's in boardrooms, people are still invoking Quebec when they're talking about C5 and what's going to happen for real. I mean, people are talking about Quebec, at least this is anecdotal. This is what I'm noticing, what I'm picking up. But people are still invoking Quebec, talking about Quebec way more frequently than they're talking about BC, way more frequently than they're talking about Indigenous First Nations communities. It seems like Quebec is always going to be in the mix there for sure. It's very politically relevant, like you said, but I think you also see in this the difference in the perspective, and I'll remind this audience, if you're new to the show, Supriya is a former senior advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. This goes to show as well, some of the different wiring between Trudeau and Mark Carney, right? You've got, Trudeau, fair to describe him as a progressive for sure, and Carney, I think you have the economist, like the banker, coming in here promising to get deals done and looking to deliver early to fulfill that promise that he made on election night.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think, for a lot of Liberals that feel as though they were hoodwinked, let's say, and that they didn't necessarily vote for this, I'd suggest that they go back and actually read the Liberal platform, because again, even though there might not have been the exact level of detail in there, ostensibly the bulk of this bill was covered in the platform.
Yeah. 100%. You write in the Toronto Star, and we'll put this in the show notes so people can read it, that Mark Carney kind of made a bit of a rookie mistake at the G7. This in the context of inviting Narendra Modi to participate. Take us into the story. Take us into your reasoning.
So, okay, let's rewind a little bit, because I think it'll help for folks to really get a little bit of a refresher in terms of what's been at play with India for the last little bit. So first and foremost, let's just point out that the Indian government has had this long-standing belief that Canada, as well as other countries, but Canada in particular, is soft on extremists that are seeking to establish an independent sixth state known as Khalistan. Okay, that's not new. It's literally as old as I am, and I'm now a middle-aged woman. Okay, so this notion that India-Canada relations are rocky or whatever, and it's only happened under my previous boss is quite frankly bullshit. It's been a long-standing issue for the last 4 decades, and the issue is that successive Indian governments have sort of seen any demand by the diaspora here in Canada, the Sikh diaspora in particular here in Canada, demanding any justice as official agitation for this independent sixth state of Khalistan, which the Indian government considers to be terrorism, even like advocating for it, right? That is not how we define terrorism in Canada by any stretch. And certainly we do not define it by peacefully advocating for something. And I think it's worth pointing out that under, Prime Minister Stephen Harper, for example, this was also an issue with, and it wasn't Modi in power then, it would have been Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. And they also came to heads on this issue. And what Harper's philosophy on this basically boiled down to was that a Canadian government wasn't just going to come in and all of a sudden abolish freedom of expression for Sikhs who are peacefully advocating for an independent state, right?
Yeah.
Now, this obviously changes in the context of the fall of 2023, in which Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stated on the floor of the House of Commons that Canadian intel services were investigating credible allegations of the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar against agents of the Indian government, right? Folks will remember he was shot and killed outside a Gurdwara in Surrey in June of 2023. These are very shocking allegations at the time, if folks will remember, and the immediate reaction from the Indian government was to claim that everything was made up by Trudeau for political purposes. Fast forward about a year later in 2024, and all of a sudden the RCMP confirms a lot of this, because what had been happening in the back end was that law enforcement as well as officials from our side were going back and forth with India to try and get them to cooperate. The RCMP confirmed not only that this extended well beyond the killing of Mr. Nijjar, but this included links that tied agents of the Indian government to multiple crimes in Canada, including homicides, extortion, arson, home invasions, and that there are a bunch of, credible threats to Canadians here in Canada, right? Again, fast forward a little bit and we get word from the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, David Morrison, that the man that is very much considered to be Narendra Modi's second in command, who's also currently the Home Minister for India, is one of the senior officials involved of having authorized some of these crimes in Canada. So again, this is not a one-off. This is a large scheme that also involves organized crime networks in Canada that are ostensibly, according to the allegations, working at the behest of agents of the Indian government, right? And in the last few weeks, we've also learned through reporting at Global News that Jagmeet Singh in 2023, according to law enforcement, was under the surveillance of somebody suspected to be an agent of the Indian government. His wife had to give birth with armed guards outside. So again, just to sum up here, okay, you have this wide-ranging, widespread scheme that involves agents of the Indian government, which ostensibly include Modi's second in command, working with organized crime networks here in Canada to basically terrorize the Sikh community here in Canada, including the leader of a federal party, right? And the response from the Indian government has been complete denial and outright disinformation, with no signs that they are cooperating whatsoever in this, or that they've changed their tune on this in any way whatsoever. And I think the reason why, Carney and his folks have decided that they were going to go ahead with this invite is ostensibly because, we need to diversify trading partners. India is a very large country. There's a huge diaspora here. We do need to, normalize relations to some degree. This ain't it. We need accountability for what happened, and quite frankly, for all we know, what is continuing to happen. And we need some sort of statement from the Indian government that, reflects that. And we haven't seen any of that. And, PM Carney, for his part, wouldn't even confirm whether or not he brought up the killing of Mr. Nijjar in his meeting with PM Modi, which is bonkers to me. But it also goes to show that I don't think the Prime Minister Carney and the team around him were fully prepared for the reaction from the community and how they would react to this. Because quite frankly, from my perspective, all this seems like is that we've just emboldened the Indian government to keep doing what they're doing, and I don't know why we would do that.
In our live chat, powered by Park Power, Ben Demon Hunter says this really pisses me off. He says official party leaders requiring armed guards to protect them from foreign governments. He says, screw that. I want to let our audience know, obviously it's a show where you're going to hear different perspectives. Sharon Carr talked to us on the 18th of June. You can check out that episode, Supriya. It's tragically titled Oilers Crushed, G7, Iran, and Israel. Anyway, but Sharon represents a different perspective on this, goes down a different angle, talks about the economic and trade relationships, etc. So if you want to hear another angle on India's inclusion in the G7, you can. One of the great points I think that you make, right? I mean, you wrap your piece in the Star with this. You basically say so much for the elbows up campaign. You say that this is like wildly inconsistent with an elbows up approach.
It is. I mean, how are we elbows up if all we're doing is standing down?
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing. We're standing down to the Indian government here. And again, to Sharon's point of like trade and it's an economic imperative, yeah, sure, okay. But then we should have the prime minister and his front bench, including his trade minister, come out and say that. Say that, right now, this investigation and the allegations don't mean as much to us as the dollars and rupees to be made, right? And I would also suggest that, like, again, this has been an investigation that has involved quite a few agencies, that has involved quite a few people. And I think, for your audience, I would spend more time listening to the folks who have a law enforcement or an intel background or in some other way would have been privy to information that somebody who has been outside of government, who perhaps didn't have a proper security clearance to access that kind of information or didn't work on those types of files would have, because there's a chasm of difference in terms of what somebody's, outlook on this would be or their opinion would be, given the information they would have been privy to.
Yeah. Hey, I got to ask you about this between our last episode and this one. Prime Minister Carney committing Canada to the biggest increase in military spending since the Second World War. I know that the president of the United States, Donald Trump, since his first term, has been pressuring Canada to get to its minimum 2% commitment, GDP to NATO spend, or to military spend, I should say. It's NATO commitment, a NATO pledge. Well, now they're talking about 5% as Carney and the leaders of 31 other member countries issuing a joint statement at The Hague saying they will raise defense-related spending to the equivalent of 5% of GDP by 2035. So they got a 10-year window to get there, but it's a huge increase. For perspective for this audience, in Canada, that means requiring an additional $50 to $90 billion in spending a year. That more than doubles the existing defense budget to between 110 and 150 billion annually by 2035. This year, Ottawa will spend 62 billion on defense. Your thoughts? It's a huge jump.
It's a huge number. I don't know why we would have done this without getting a 100% reassurance from President Trump that this meant he actually full-throatedly supports Article 5 and the U.S. will actually, that's that self-defense clause, sorry, that says an attack on one is an attack on all of us. And actually get those sorts of reassurances.
Yeah.
Because right now, all from, again, from an outsider's-ish perspective, like I'm not privy to the inner circle anymore, or how these conversations are happening on the back end. But so from my perspective, it just seems that we all capitulated to Trump, gave him an enormous win without getting anything out of it, other than, once again, to basically show that it's not so much elbows up, it's more or less elbows mid to down, because we didn't actually put up much of a fight on this. And, I'm sure there was a lot of pressure from NATO members, other NATO members as well. And I think that there's a lot to be said about Canada needing to invest in our military, right? That we haven't put in the investments, that are the men and women in uniform that we ask to risk everything for us aren't being compensated fairly, and that there are a whole host of issues that they deserve to be treated, better and more fairly on. And hopefully some of that goes to this, right? And the increase in our defense spending. But how are we justifying the other aspects of it? And I think to for a lot of Canadians, we're going to want some more detail on what some of those trade-offs are going to be, because that money's not going to come from nowhere.
Yeah.
So does that mean higher taxes? Does that mean program cuts? Like where are the dollars and cents coming from?
Yes, it means all of the things, right? It's obviously like when you're talking about finding another $100 billion. Obviously a huge issue. Every single time we talk to you, our understanding of these issues deepens, and we are so grateful for that. There are calls, I should warn you, in the live chat for a weekly appearance on Real Talk. So maybe you and I should speak behind the scenes and see what we can cook up.
Sounds good, Ryan.
All right, Supriya, we love you. Thanks for doing this.
Talk soon.
You got it. That's Supriya Dwivedi. Obviously, longtime political commentator, former colleague of mine in terrestrial radio, former senior advisor to the Prime Minister of Canada, and much more. Make sure you follow her on social, and we will link to her Toronto Star piece on Mark Carney's rookie mistake in the show notes on the podcast and on YouTube. I want to get into the live chat, your thoughts. Obviously, we just kind of like opened the can on military spending, and it's starting to light up there. If you're listening to this, like most people will, later in the day or later in the week, you can always send us an email to talk@ryanjesperson.com or leave a comment on our YouTube channel, on our YouTube episode. Thanks in advance for subscribing there. These conversations happen with the incredible partnership of our friends at North Road Investment Council. This is a team that's not making a bunch of dough on commissions from the big banks by selling you investment products that you don't need. They're independent fiduciaries, and you pay them a per hour fee, right? So there's no fluff, there's no pressure. It's just clear advice and strategies that make sense. That's what they're all about at North Road Investment Council. You can book an appointment to check in with Marshall and Carrie and their team, get answers to questions you may have on your family's wealth management, your financial security. Should you take your CPP out early or should you wait? How to make sure if you live into your 90s, if life blesses you in that way, that you don't run out of cash, right? What happens to your spouse if something happens to you? If you're lying awake at night thinking about this type of stuff, sleep. That's right. You got to talk to these guys. Let them answer the questions. There's many things that sets North Road Investment Council apart. You can learn more about their expertise as financial planners and their 4 different service business units, including digital risk advisory, by checking them out online at northroadic.com. Hey, if you're in the market, like I know many people are right now, to pick up a barbecue, maybe a smoker, you're going to be making some big decisions, right? Do you need a rotisserie on it? You need one of those side searing grills on it? Are you going to go propane or natural gas? The team at You Need a Barbecue in Sherwood Park, at this family-owned business, the best in the business at answering these types of questions and helping you out. You may have seen on my social media recently, I'm a customer of this place. Went in there and I asked Russell and Brian about the best fit for our family. Let them know from time to time I'll do a brisket. For the most part, I'm doing steaks, burgers, ribs, right? So they kind of helped us decide on the perfect fit for our backyard. I first plugged in with these guys with one of their barbecue classes. We were learning from their top pit masters, leveling up our own grilling game, and you can do the same thing. Whether you're looking for rubs and spices and sauces, maybe a new smoker, a new grill, or you want to take one of those classes, you can find them online at youneedabbq.com. And when it comes to the protein you're going to put on your new grill, our friends at Friesen Brothers, ready to help you out. They're real butchers, are cutting Alberta proteins, setting you up for the summer as you entertain or maybe have quiet family time in your haven. Whether it's pork, beef, chicken, bison, they've got you covered. Plus, produce sourced as locally as possible. And of course, their in-store bakery has you covered. Fresh buns for those burgers, anybody? Nobody does it like Friesen Brothers. Alberta grown, Alberta owned, celebrating their 70th anniversary this year. You can learn more about Friesen Brothers online by checking out their website, friesen.com. Congratulations to our friends at Kubi Energy. Thanks to them for their kart partnership at the Real Talk Golf Classic. Couldn't do it without them. About a week ago, they welcomed customers, suppliers, and partners to their summer solstice bash in celebration of their 10-year anniversary. And we want to shout out Melanie and Henry as well, the 2 winners of that $10,000 solar giveaway. Remember we were telling you about that? Kubi was giving away $5,000 rebates to 2 different customers, totaling $10,000 in support or in celebration of their 10-year anniversary. Very cool to see, and of course we want to remind you as well, if you're looking at putting solar on your roof this summer, or you want to know what it might look like cost-wise, savings-wise, and otherwise, check them out online at kuby.ca. That's Kuby.ca. If you're investing in your home this summer, no better investment than custom closets and storage solutions designed and installed by the team at California Closets of Canada. You can find them online at californiaclosets.ca, an independent family business that manufactures everything they install right here in our home province of Alberta. They can work with any scenario, any situation. They can work with any budget, and everything they install is guaranteed for life. That's why people love the entryways, the mudrooms, the laundry rooms, the Murphy beds, the custom garage storage units. It all starts with a free consultation today at californiaclosets.ca. And as we're talking about charitable giving, as we're talking about building communities, I want to make sure that UCAN Youth Services is on your radar. You can find them online at ucan.ca. We're proud to partner with this charitable organization that's helping young people out of harm's way and onto a path of economic independence. Again, that's ucan.ca. Check them out online today. If you're making a decision when it comes to your family's charitable giving, or maybe even your estate, never too soon to plan ahead, we endeavor to make sure that UCAN Youth Services is on your radar. That's ucan.ca. I'm still blown away by Noob's drone shots from the Real Talk Golf Classic. There's nothing like a drone shot. I want to give him a big shout out on that. We had a good time out there. On military spending, Don is checking in here, talking about the fighter planes. This has been a story for a long time, hasn't it, Don? We've been talking, it seems like, replacing Canada's fighter jets for like 30 years. He says doing another review of the F-35 is stupid. He says every time we review the purchase, the F-35 wins. Don says finish the damn order. There's a lot of others of you that are saying that Canadian defense spending needs consistent support from both parties, from Conservatives and Liberal parties. Says projects to purchase a plane or a ship proceed over the lives of several governments. That's a really great point there. Others are saying that the spending or the investment in the military is long overdue. For sure. Ken K, this is Super Chat Ken, rather, says, I'd be curious as to whether some of these infrastructure projects that lower Europe's reliance on risky energy providers could be considered part of NATO's security spending. Isn't that one an interesting point, Super Chat Ken? Like energy security, right? I've seen that the conversation is continuing as well on the library book stuff. It feels like, even though we talked about it like an hour ago, I understand why. It's something that resonates with people. I don't know about you, but as we're listening to those survey results, it kind of strikes me as interesting. There was not like a super strong majority position on anything except for everybody agreeing that elementary school students shouldn't have access to graphic materials. And I think we also reiterated that there is no credible evidence that elementary-aged students did access graphic materials at any point from school libraries. So it sort of seemed like all of the survey results in the like 25 to 45% range, which is kind of interesting when it comes to public polling, right?
Yeah, it was very organized that way. But like, I don't know. Did it tell us anything new? Would you show a graphic sexual image directly to your child who's that age? Yeah. No. We all agree. Oh, cool. Tell us something we don't know. Secondly, like the amount of fraudulent votes that they found. Who knows about the ones they didn't find? They just found doubles. Yeah. Like who knows about the other ones that were done from, I assume this was all done online? Like people didn't stand in a line and check a box, right? Correct. So, I mean, it just seems skewed to me, and it didn't tell us anything new. And like this, I seem upset, but I'm not, because I don't have kids, so it doesn't directly affect me. What I'm upset about is that we're spending so much time on this. Not today on the show. We had to do this, right? Because obviously the survey results, but just in general, seems like a distraction. There's bigger issues. It is a distraction. 100%. There's bigger issues going on in this province, like, fixing our healthcare system, which the premier said was going to happen very quickly and hasn't. Everything going on with AHS, and it's kind of a dog whistle. And I know what this is. This is moms and dads. Let's be honest, straight moms and dads not wanting their kids to look at gay material, queer material. That's the main point of this, because I don't think anyone had this on their mind before. Yeah. And the same parents, and I'm going to say this, and I'm not insulting anyone, including you, because I don't have kids. Again, I'm trying to tread lightly.
You don't have to speak freely, man.
But the same people who are saying, yes, get these books out of the library are the same parents who are likely to plop their kids down in front of an iPad, a laptop, or Netflix and walk away and take an hour or two to themselves. And they'll say stuff like, yeah, well, we've got parental controls on and we check in. But like 8-year-olds know how to turn parental controls off. And 8-year-olds, if they want access to sexual material, violent material, explicit material, they are going to find it. And I think the best point Laura made today on the show, and I'm going to put it in a highlight for sure, is would you rather your kid is denied access with walls and bars and blindfolds all around them, or would you rather they find this stuff and come home and you be open with them and they ask about it and you explain it to them and they become knowledgeable and aware and have a great perspective growing into adulthood? I would rather, I'm not saying expose them to it every day, bluntly, but if they stumble onto it, if they get small doses of it, and if they get inquisitive, if they ask questions, that's healthy. That's growing up, knowing about the world. This whole thing, like put them in a box, shut the lid, turn off the light, and then when they're 13 years old, just boom, here's sex. Like it doesn't make sense to me at all.
Ken says 100%, Johnny, kids turn gay from reading those stories.
Yeah, exactly.
And then he has the sarcasm. Others are saying, Alberta Girl says this is yet another wedge between parents and public schools and teachers, which is kind of an interesting point. Boom Shanker X says, my kids can't get around my controls. Meantime, Nick says 4-year-olds can turn those controls off. But I will say this. Noob says, hell yeah, Johnny. Can I get an amen? Noob wants an amen. I will say this, and maybe it's easier said than done, but I've always felt like the communication between parents and kids that develops organically, that develops over time, the trust relationship that happens is, like in my limited experience as the parent of a 9 and a 3-year-old, is like one of the greatest assets and the greatest joys you can have when your kid feels comfortable to ask you about something or talk to you about something. Now, I'll acknowledge it probably changes when, I think of like some of the more complex or complicated stuff, and even this is how I'm wired. Some of you listening to this are going to go, this isn't complicated, this isn't complex, but I'm like, when do you offer your young, your tween or teen or whatever, like contraception, like birth control? When do you talk about condoms? When do you make condoms available? Like, when do you allow your kid? And some will write in, and your friends probably joke around and call you prudes, and others say, no, you're responsible in this, and everyone has their own opinion. I don't know that there's necessarily a right or there's definitely some wrong answers for sure, but like people will say, well, like, when they need to know about it or when they need to learn about it, but how do you make that judgment call? And I would imagine that for some kids,
it's different for every kid.
Different families, right? Like, when do you allow your kid to like try a taste of wine? Like if you're in France or if you're in
Italy,
Europe,
you're like,
you know what I mean? It's like not a big deal at all. If you're here and like you're in a restaurant and you let your like 11-year-old try a sip of wine, you get carried out by Child and Family Services. So 100%. The point being, there's like different perspectives on it. I always just say, and this is probably obvious, that open channels of communication are great. Parents are going to want to obviously have input. The mom, you carried these children. You're raising these children. These children are the most important thing to you. Nobody's question. Like, I mentioned this Alberta Parents Union. I'm a little weirded out that they've not agreed to come talk to us. Why'd they add me to their mailing list if they don't want to come on the show? I don't want to come in here and crucify them. Why would I? I appreciate when parents are engaged. I understand that not everybody feels the same way about everything. I get that is how that worked, but I do think that, and I circle back to this point on those survey results. It's very interesting to see that basically what happened here. Here's my takeaway in layperson's terms: is that an equal amount of people on both sides of the issue responded to this. Right? Because the survey results are very measured. The biggest discrepancies that we see, the biggest differences is around parental permission or parental notification around books that are being checked out. About 4 out of 10 parents want to see it. They want to have parental permission before kids can take out so-called graphic books as they get older into junior high and high school. About 10% of librarians want to see it. I'm not sure how I feel. I want to definitely know how my kid's school year is going. I want to know how my kid's progressing in school. We just saw our son's report card last day of school yesterday. Shout out to Wyatt and the thousands of other kids that are celebrating the end of school. But at the same time, there's a lot of kids, whose parents are going to basically block them from real life information, whether that's like scientific evidence around sex ed and the like. And we've had this conversation on the show before about, parents that support kids opting in to sex ed as opposed to opting out. And that's a big deal.
Yeah. I just think earlier is better. And I'm not a parent. Again, I can't keep referencing. I'll stop. But I just think earlier is better. And Ryan, I love that there's a gap in your children, because everything you mess up with Wyatt, you can try again with Noah. No, I'm just kidding. But what I'm saying is, like, Noah, or Wyatt is like a very thoughtful young boy. But, like, that, like, the longer you wait, the longer you shelter your kids from this. You grew up, you went to school with these kids in religious sects who, like, man, you don't develop well when you're locked out of those channels, when other kids have information and education that maybe isn't taught directly in school, but is of worldly value. And that creates a social, I don't know what the word is, but it allows you to be more comfortable and fit in better with society. And I'm not saying everyone has to follow the grain, but you know what I'm talking about. And I'm not saying we should expose kids to sex and drugs at like 5 years old. I'm just saying the earlier you teach them about condoms and safe sex and adults shouldn't do this with kids. And this is a relationship that you may not see, that we and your father and mother have at home, but these are relationships that exist in the world that aren't in our family circle, but this is how people live, and it's okay as well. Like, all these things are good, and holding that back from kids, it's only going to cause them developmental issues.
100% agree with you. Tracy says these days you can check in on how your kid's doing like every day of the year. Tracy, our little guy's got a watch on. I can see where he is every single second.
I was just going to say, we got him air tagged, right?
I mean, not technically,
no, but parents are
basically, right? Tracy says you don't have to wait for a report card, but some parents still don't do that, yet they want to censor books. Others are saying, and I appreciate these comments here, like Ms. KD says, like, was this part of the UCP's mandate? Like, what have they achieved from that mandate? Not a thing. Others of you are saying, like, Goose says, my dad poured me Bailey's as a child and told me it was chocolate milk.
He wanted you to take a nap, Goose.
He wanted you to have a nap, Goose. Vamp Fashion says, remember in the late 60s to the mid-80s, kids grew up seeing and knowing about sex, and they weren't destroyed by it. Says it's the pilgrim religious fear that drives most of these issues, including in pride. I 100% agree with you. Greg says advertising is plenty revealing for kids. Another interesting comment here from Kat, who shares her granddaughter just turned 11 in April and got her period that same month. She says, so kids need the sex ed. And I'll say this, like I was sharing with you, I try not too much to talk about like my kids and their journey. It's speaking of consent, they've not consented to have their lives discussed on a popular podcast. But Wyatt did commence in grade 4 this year, sex ed. And I was just curious to see how it was rolled out. And I was curious to see, what they were learning. And guess what, everybody? You can have access to it. There's no secrets. And you know what we learned, man? They're learning basic biological realities about their own bodies. They're learning the right words to use. They're learning what everything does, and at a grade 4 age-appropriate level, how everything plays out. They're not talking about, some of these books, and we shared with you on the first episode that we did. I literally just spilled coffee all over myself. The first episode that we did on this library book thing.
Do you need a minute?
No, I don't. What am I going to do about it? But now I'm wondering what I'm going to do for all my meetings.
I can chit-chat for a second if you need to get a napkin or something.
That's the benefit of having all hardwood here, is we don't sweat the spills. But I remember thinking, at that time, we read passages from some of these controversial books, right? And so you've heard me talk about all the stuff and use all the words and read them. But there's some pretty graphic stuff, obviously, because as you describe and write about sex, it's graphic. But none of these were being put in front of 8 and 9-year-old kids. No. That's so obvious. And the one overwhelming and resounding result from that survey, no matter where you came at it from, is 96% of people. So everybody agrees that kids in elementary school shouldn't have access to that, and kids in elementary school have not had access to that. So what have we learned from all of this?
And, it's also funny, this is all coming from, and I'm not painting conservatives, but it's coming from the right. It's coming from the UCP. Coming from conservatives in this province, in this country. Let's be honest, it's probably also being, pushed from across the border by other, conservative governments in the States are probably, forwarding these emails to people here. Let's be honest, because they're doing the same thing down south in the States and on the East Coast. It doesn't make sense to me that we don't want the government involved in our lives. It's a big talking point for the right and conservatives. But if it aligns with, our beliefs, then sure, come in, ban books, take away the rights of other people. And I was just looking up the numbers this morning because I was like, I wonder these things. Like, do kids use libraries as much as I was in school when I didn't have access to a laptop and a smartphone in my knapsack? And it is down in North America. I was trying to compare Canada and the States, but I can only get in North America. It says about 30%. So how much more down is it when you know that there's a watchdog? It's going to go down probably to 50%. I don't know. But it just, do you want kids to use the library at all? Or do you just want them to be on the internet where all gates are off and they're getting exposed to perspectives, opinions, horrible things on the internet? I just feel like this is just going down a path, and I'll go back to it. That is not good, but I'll go back to it where, is this even an issue, Ryan? You said it a million times today. It's not an issue.
What I appreciate is that when stuff like this flares up, and this is like the whole, let me peek behind the curtain for 10 seconds. Some people are like, why doesn't Real Talk go once a week? Why don't you do one super episode once a week? I'll tell you why.
7 hours.
Because there's enough to talk about, and this is an audience that's, like the show, perpetually curious. We love to hash things out. We love to explore different angles or different sides on an issue. Look at Modi in India at the G7. 2 guests in the last week. Absolutely opposed on their perspective to that. We love that stuff, right? Minister Nicolaides and Laura Winton today, absolutely opposite perspectives, or at least not aligned on this issue. That's the whole point. But the reason is because we take an issue like this, but it allows us to dig a little bit deeper into relationships that parents have with their kids, the government's adversarial relationship with public educators, censorship in schools, government overreach, American influence on Canadian politics.
Totally.
We're talking about and exploring all these different angles, right? Like Lori says, Johnny's right. She says the earlier the better. Says, I taught sex ed in junior high for decades, Lori did. She says many have nobody who will talk to them about anything related. And quite frankly, the last thing we want is girls and boys learning about sex from porn, right? That's not how sex works. That's not how relationships work. I know that I'm saying something completely obvious, but you don't want young people having their sex ed served as porn. It's a horrific and totally it's a counterproductive way to put it. Let's say that. Ben, with an interesting point in our chat, says, Real Talk is persuading me more toward the middle on this subject, says Ben. But he says, FYI, more information and education, the better. He says, that's age appropriate. And honestly, Ben, I'd be curious to know where you came at it from before, because I don't feel like I've been trying to convince anybody on this.
No.
I feel like we're just stating the obvious. Young people need to have access to information, including edgy information that's going to help them understand the world around them. We're not a bunch of Snow White driven prudes. And I was talking about, and at the same time, nobody thinks that elementary school kids should have access to graphic materials. And by the way, all these cheeky monkeys, these parental unions. Isn't it also funny they're calling themselves unions? I guarantee most of these people.
I thought they hate unions.
They hate unions. So I think it's hilarious that they're calling themselves the parents union. But I digress. But they're slipping in the word pornography, Johnny.
Yeah,
they're
I know.
Slipping in the word. There's no pornography.
Comparing these books to Playboy and saying, well, you might as well put Playboy in there. Playboy is, let's be honest, you could call it sexual exploitation, but comparing that to a snapshot from a book of a graphic, animated or drawn artistic rendering of a sexual act, one little piece from a book to a magazine totally about sex is crazy. But also, what you just said there, them being in favor of not being in favor of unions and then forming a union, it's just
hilarious.
It's crazy.
It's hilarious. Boom Shanker X says, let's be honest, people avoid uncomfortable situations. Cheryl outside, thank you for your YouTube channel membership. Cheryl says the most important conversation I had with my girls was not about sex, but about sexual assault. How to be aware, how to protect themselves. Could we all just teach our kids about consent? You know what, Cheryl? Honestly, we're talking to our 3-year-old about consent. We're not talking to them about consent when you're getting into bed with somebody, but I'm 100% with you. You got to plant the seeds early on what consent means. And it's not all sexual, but all sexuality involves or needs to involve consent. And so that's something that we're really, really trying to focus on here. Lori says, my daughter in her early 40s still gives me a hard time about making her watch when I was previewing films for sex ed. That from Lori, which is amazing. Johnny, what did you want to say?
I was just going to say that's my point that I forgot about. Sometimes I dive in and then I forget what I was going to say and I just reiterate what you said. But when you were talking about consent and when you were talking about kids not learning from porn, and I didn't want to draw a line directly to this, but that's where we get examples, incidents like what happened with the Team Canada stuff.
Yeah.
Like this is when young boys, especially girls as well, learn about porn and sex and relationships only from the internet because they're barred from all other areas of education. We get instances like the Team Canada incident, and we get other instances where, like, you know, that girl's life is ruined. Those men's career is ruined, probably for good reason. Let's be honest, definitely for good reason. But like, that could be avoided with early education, showing people what real relationships from all different walks of life are like, showing them what consent is like, showing them how to have safe sex, showing them what is definitely wrong, not how you ask someone to have sex on video camera under, like, you know,
or to send you photos or nudes or whatever.
Exactly. We could get rid of all of that stuff.
We could do a million episodes on this, and maybe we will, Johnny, because the good news is, as we approach our 5th anniversary, we're still just getting started here. Great to hear from Feder in the chat. He says, I just got back from Dallas, Texas. He says, I wish we operated more like them. He says, everybody minds their own business. Everybody's polite, sir and ma'am. Respect in society was evident. Less of a victim mentality. Feder says, Danielle Smith is winning me over more and more every day. I never thought that was possible. How about this from M. Aitken, who makes a very good point. She says, farm kids understand way more about sex than city kids. Yeah, no kidding. For obvious reasons. And Vamp Fashion says Team Canada wasn't about consent. I would say it was to a certain degree, but let me read the comment. Team Canada wasn't about consent. It was about years of taught and ingrained entitlement. I think that both can be true there. Keep the comments coming to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Emily says, my husband played minor hockey in the 80s. That stuff was still known about back then, 100%. MJ says, read a book to the kiddies at the appropriate age. My daughter says, gross. And my son says, so go make me a brother.
Whoa! I will say,
way to go, MJ.
Shout out to Dallas, Texas, the craziest place I've ever been as well. Like, you just, like,
I actually love Dallas.
And it's funny that all the comedians are moving there, and you know, most of them I'm like, I don't even like these guys, but it's true. It is a very free place. It's beautiful. It's hot. We went to the Alamo when we were down there for a wedding, and I was just like, man, people are living their freest, best lives down in Texas, right?
Well said. And unfortunately, not in the Stanley Cup final.
Why you gotta?
You're
not gonna try and drag.
If Florida's gonna rub it into us, we can rub it into Dallas, Vegas, and LA. Isn't that how it works?
100%. Shout out to our Real Talk live chat, members only, that is on Discord. People in there wanting to talk about Connor McDavid today, so I thought I'd just throw that at you because I don't know if you're going to leave or talk about it. But if you want to join, hit join on our YouTube homepage, become a member, and you can get in on the private Discord chat.
Absolutely. Real Talkers, as we wrap this episode again, we just want to thank you for your engagement, your involvement. I want to reiterate how thrilled we were when I got the number on my phone, $61,500. Guys, that's 12 scholarships. That's 12 scholarships for the Real Talk Julie Rohr Scholarship. These are post-secondary students that have lost a parent to cancer. And next year, we're going to raise more. We're going to do even more at the Real Talk Pond Hockey Classic next February, but we can't do it without your support. Thanks for subscribing to our channels. Thanks for telling your friends. Thanks for everything you do to make this show happen. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harmon Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.